The movie begins with Father Uffizi, a priest who hunts vampires, chasing a woman who seems to be innocent. But as the chase continues, the woman is revealed to be a vampire with a twin sister who is also a vampire. After a while, the twin sister jumps through a window and joins her sister. Together, they attack the priest. They hold him down and prepare to bite him, but he quickly turns the table on them, wraps their necks together with a special rope and pulls it, beheading both of them. He takes their heads and burns their bodies, but he senses something on his neck and discovers that one of the twins had bitten him. So to get rid of the infection, he exposes himself to sunlight, which was an agonizing experience, and stops the change. 2 months later, in New Orleans, Elizabeth Bain attends the class of her husband, Lowell, a college medical professor who suffers from a very fatal degenerative sickness. After class, she hangs out with her fellow students, Kenny, who sells drugs to his teachers, and the only other girl in their circle, Tanya. After spending some time at the bar, she goes to the morgue, where she works as an examiner. That day, her friend and co-worker Luke brings in the corpse of Dracula, an ancient vampire with multiple names across decades of lifetimes. Dracula was found hanging on a cross while being burnt alive. Elizabeth and Luke begin their exam by opening his badly burnt body up from his chest down to the abdomen. Elizabeth is shocked to see that his liver and other organs are white, but Luke, who stays at the morgue to help Elizabeth, immediately jumps to the conclusion that it is a vampire and asks Elizabeth to check his teeth. She opens Dracula's mouth and the teeth look normal, but a fang suddenly comes out and nicks her index finger, which causes her to panic and call Lowell, who is lying on his bed. He struggles to believe what he is just hearing, but listens to her anyway. Meanwhile, Luke, who is excited about his correct hunch, gets an anonymous phone call asking for the body in exchange for $30 million. And at the same time, Uffizi has arrived to deal with Dracula. Luke tells Elizabeth about the caller and what he is offering. He wants to use this opportunity to find out what makes Dracula's price tag ridiculously high and wants to discover Dracula's secret behind immortality. But Elizabeth thinks it is wrong. After some back and forth, Luke convinces Elizabeth to switch the body with another burnt body and take Dracula to a secure place. Luke takes out the body in a trash tank and moves it out while Uffizi passes by. Uffizi reaches the examination room, expressing his desire to make a final prayer for the deceased, and asks Elizabeth where the body is. She is scared when he shows a very strange moving ability, but she is rescued by another examiner, who shows Uffizi the burnt body. He says his prayers and is about to light it on fire, but realizes the body is not Dracula's. He immediately rushes downstairs, but Elizabeth and Luke are long gone. While Elizabeth is driving, she starts seeing scary visions of Dracula as a result of her exposure to Dracula's fangs. She swerves a little and stops, which forces Luke to take the wheels while they continue their journey. Lowell calls her and hears about the mystery caller. After cautioning her about the unknown identity of the caller and the money, he tells them to take the body to his secluded family home, where they would conduct some experiments before speaking to the mysterious caller. At the house, Lowell arrives with Kenny and Tanya, who were invited to assist them with the experiment. They put the body in a tub, fill it with lots of blood, and restrain the arms and legs, while Lowell watches from another room using a camera mounted in the room. Some time passes without any result. Elizabeth decides to pull the body out and see what happened. But suddenly, Dracula comes alive in a frenzy, breaking his restraints and attacking everybody. Everyone tried to hold him down, but Dracula couldn't be contained. He bites Tanya and throws her out of the window. Then he breaks the tub and almost chokes Luke, but he is stopped by Eric, the benefactor who introduces himself as the Money. He uses a sun gun light and burns him while pouring water at the same time. Lowell remained shocked by what just happened right in front of him. After a while, everyone comes down to the place where Tanya's body lies. Elizabeth starts to fall apart and suggests calling the police, but the rest don't agree. Lowell tells her that something good may still come out and that calling the police will just complicate things. So, the group decides to continue the experiments after Luke and Kenny dig and bury Tanya. Elizabeth checks her finger, and the bite is starting to spread, causing her to have more and more visions. The rest of the group looks back at the recordings and sees Dracula is not visible. Then, Eric tells Lowell that he has arranged to take Dracula to another location and continue the experiment, which makes Kenny very angry. He expresses his frustration and accuses Lowell of wanting to use the experiment for his disease and walks out. The next day, Eric and the group have transferred Dracula to an abandoned pool, and they restrain him using iron chains painted with liquid silver. They also surround him with ultraviolet lights that rapidly burn him. In addition to those, Eric introduces some spear guns and silver-plated harpoons. Meanwhile, back at Eric's family home, 2 police officers came to check the house after there were reports of some kind of demonic activities. One of the officers enters the house and sees drops of blood coming from the above floor. He pulls out his gun and enters the room where Dracula was held. There, he meets Father Uffizi, who is examining the scene. Uffizi tries to calm the officer down, but the officer calls his partner and approaches Uffizi to handcuff him. Uffizi, who turned around and held his hand on his head, saw the grave of Tanya empty and turned around to see Tanya, who is now a vampire, cuffed to him. She starts a fight, and Uffizi throws her out of the building after quickly shooting the cuffs in the middle, freeing himself as a result. Tanya dies after being burnt by the sun, while the officer goes down the stairs only to find his partner dead. Uffizi checks on the officer and burns the body of the partner before he leaves. At the pool, the experiment is underway. Kenny applies his drop of blood on the scraped skin of Dracula that was obtained before he was submerged in blood, while Lowell observes the results on a computer screen. The cells of the skin were regenerating at a top speed, but to get a more conclusive result, they needed to draw more blood. Everyone looks at each other wondering who will take on the task of drawing blood. Finally, Elizabeth takes on the challenge and goes to Dracula with Eric standing behind her with the spear gun. When Dracula sees her, he tells her she is not like the others and agrees to allow her to draw his blood willingly in exchange for lowering the intensity of the ultraviolet lights. Eric complies with Dracula's demand, and she draws blood from his neck. They take Dracula's blood samples, and this time, they test it with Lowell's tissue. Dracula's cells began killing the host cells and replaced them with its own. This particular result frightens Elizabeth and points out the dangers of losing oneself. Kenny, on the other hand, is excited by what he sees and suggests that it won't change his identity, but make anyone better and make them superhuman. While this conversation is going on, Luke, who took holy water with some bottles from a local church, arrives and destroys their discovery by applying some holy water to the regenerated sample, causing it to burn. Luke boldly confronts everyone and tells them that Dracula is the monster. This makes Kenny angry and questions Luke's loyalty. Conversely, Lowell and Eric are convinced they can separate evil from the cure. Luke didn't only come with holy water, but with other rituals that work against vampires. He spreads around tiny seeds circling Dracula and puts on him a net with many knots. Meanwhile, Father Uffizi visits the local church from which Luke stole the holy water. He tells the other priest, who is responsible for that church, that he was sent by Father Perigord, another priest who has dealt with Dracula in the past. He asks for the boy who saw Luke steal the holy water. They let him in, and a flashback shows Father Perigord speaking to Uffizi before sending him to this mission. The conversation reveals that Dracula was the Iscariot of Judas, the betrayer, and the only way to get rid of him was to give him the absolution of his sin as Judas. Back at the abandoned house, Elizabeth comes to Dracula to take his blood the second time, but he is almost drained. At the same time, Kenny injects himself with Dracula's blood and turns into a vampire. He grabs Lowell and scares him before going to steal the rest of Dracula's blood samples. Eric, Elizabeth, and Luke go outside and see Kenny, who shows his fangs, leaping over a car and running away. Eric decides to go after Kenny while Elizabeth and Luke stay. Lowell approaches Dracula from afar on his wheelchair. He locks eyes with Dracula, which enables Dracula to control his mind. He drives the wheelchair over a ledge and falls. Lowell is alive, but he has a weak pulse. Elizabeth and Luke pick him up and lay him down. Elizabeth is desperate to save Lowell, so she gives her blood to Dracula to help him replenish. But this comes at a cost. She gets caught up in a lustful vision with Dracula. She gets dangerously sucked in, but Luke turns the intensity of the ultraviolet lights back and separates them. Then, she takes back some blood and gives it to Lowell. Somewhere near the pool, Kenny attacks a woman and kills her. Eric catches up to him, but he is no match for Kenny. Before he kills Eric, Uffizi arrives at the scene and stops him. Eddie leaps to attack, but Uffizi easily beheads him using a whip with sharp edges. Then Eric, who is scared, shoots Uffizi in the back, but he catches and forces Eric to reveal Dracula's location by threatening him. He lets Eric go after telling him to warn the others. Before he hunts Dracula, Uffizi kills the woman Kenny attacked and turns into a vampire. Eric goes back and warns the group about Uffizi. He asks about Lowell, who is now recovering well. Elizabeth brings Lowell back to the room where Dracula is held, supporting him on the side. Dracula's blood reaches its full effect, and Lowell stands straight. Then, he starts revealing a shocking truth while walking. Lowell was working in a morgue before he got sick, and there he got his first vampire encounter. He didn't get the chance to study the body because of Father Perigord. After getting sick, he used Elizabeth to continue his search. He was the mystery caller at the morgue, and he also knew Eric back when was in college. This makes Elizabeth angry, and she expresses her wish for him to die. She knocks the last blood sample out of Eric's hand, and it lands near Dracula. Then, she sprays holy water on Lowell's face, which burns him, and he flees the scene shouting. Then, when Eric goes to pick the sample up, Dracula breaks free and bites his face. He frees his restraints and gets past all the rituals Luke put around him, but he gets confronted by Uffizi, who beheaded Lowell like his previous vampires. He tells Luke to take Elizabeth outside to face the sun, to give her one last chance. Luke tries to take her outside, but she has already turned. At the same time, a showdown happens between Dracula and Father Uffizi. Uffizi nearly defeats him, but while he is doing a final prayer before he beheaded him, Dracula manages to go into Uffizi's head and show him a vision about the final days of Judas, during which Elizabeth, who is now a vampire, shoots Uffizi from the back with a spear gun and rescues Dracula. And with that, the movie ends. I hope you enjoyed our video. Watch the next recaps on the screen and don't forget to subscribe for amazing videos. See you in the next one.